Lenny,
Louis, how are you?
I am so happy to see you, my friend.
Same here. It's only been a few minutes, right?
Well,
Or
yeah,
decades.
or
Yeah,
decade. I'm gonna say
right,
it's been
right.
a long time. I know
Yes,
we worked together many, many years ago, and then you moved away to New York and did shows like the Drowsy Chaperone.
I did. I was very, very
Yeah.
lucky. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you talking to me about it, and I guess I wanted to ask, how did you get started with the show? How early in its development were you involved?
You know, when I was on tour with, I think I was doing a national tour of Little Shop, and I flew in. I had like one morning where I could, and I flew in for another show to audition for Tarzan, I think. And at the last minute, my agent said, "Well, if you're back in town, there's an audition for this new thing called Drowsy Chaperone." And I said, "Well, you have to get me in first thing because I have to catch my plane to get back to Louisville. I think that's where I was working because I have a show that night." So they were wonderful about accommodating me and getting me in and out of the audition. And when I got it, I had found out that Casey, because Casey Nicola was his first time directing and choreographing a Broadway show. And I had worked with Casey a few years before that up at Sacramento Music Circus. We had done Music Man together. And he had told us all this afterwards. He said, because it was my first show, I needed to be surrounded by people I knew and trusted and I knew had my back. So we had this great cast who adored Casey, and it worked out.
It played here first in Los Angeles, didn't it?
Yeah, and I remember we did our first preview and not having any idea how the audience respond. I mean, for all we knew, they would have just sat on their hands the whole time and never opened their mouth, but they just went nuts over it from that first preview on. And we worked on it the whole time we were in LA. But by the time we left, the show was in pretty good shape, for New York.
Do you have any recollections of how the show evolved from when you started rehearsals to that? Were there songs that I'm sure there were songs added or cut, but the
There
show
were not that many. The main one, there was a song we did in LA that Underwood and Tottendale did. It was a song she played on a ukulele that they threw up from the pit for Georgia, and it was very sweet. But it just, I guess, it didn't quite work. But when we did, and they wrote a new song for them that works much better. But when we did the album, they included that song on the album. They added it at the end of the
got it.
record, so they got
Got
to.
it.
But other than that, I don't think there were any real musical changes from L.A. to New York. It was
Wow. It's like the writers had a really firm grip on the style of show they wanted to do. I
They
mean, that
did. And
reads
I
right
mean, do
through
you
the
know the
script.
history that it was written for Bob's wedding? That the
No, I don't know
writers,
any of this.
it was a
No.
wedding gift to him and his wife Janet, and
Mm,
that's why the ingenues are Robert and Janet Vandergraff, and,
okay.
Lisa Lambert and Greg. They were all good friends of Bob's, and they just wrote this little 15-minute parody as a wedding gift that they all played little parts in for them and named the male, the heroine and the hero after Bob and Janet. And then it just morphed, and then people just went, this is great. And they expanded it, and it was done, I think, in Toronto. I might be wrong, but they did it like an off Broadway, comparable to an off Broadway venue there. And it just became this cult following. And Kevin McCullum, our producer, was in Canada. He saw it and he went, I think you have a show here. And
Mm.
he, the impetus behind it, and then when it was in LA, then they totally recast, they cast it with American actors. But I'm just relaying these little stories. One of the
Yeah.
biggest things with it is that I don't know if it was Kevin, it wasn't Casey, but somebody involved just said that the part of the chaperone had to be a star, a huge star, like Liza Minnelli or something. And so that was the last role cast because anybody they were offering it to, when they read the show, they went, she has a great song, but it's not a leading role. And
Right.
Casey kept saying, I know the perfect person for this part, which was Beth. And they were like, no, it has to be a star. That's the title of the show, is a Drowsy Chaperone. And Beth was the last person cast. and and then that the rest is history.
Right, right. Now, how was Bob already set to be man in chair by the time?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. He always was. That was from the get-go. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And how was that? I mean, the structure of the show is that he's not in a lot of the musical numbers, but he's threaded through the show throughout. What was that like to be working with somebody in out of town tryouts who's also writing the show? I mean, was that a conflict at some point, or did he keep disappearing?
No, no, I never found it to be, because he had a co-writer as well. So he
Right.
always had another eye watching when he was working as an actor. So I think that helped a lot. And they were really good about letting us contribute and make suggestions. And Bob, I mean, he's just the sweetest man in the world. And I don't ever remember that being an issue. That's
Oh, that's
interesting.
great. Yeah, no, I always wondered when somebody like, whether it's George M. Cohan or anybody who's Anthony Newley, when they're writing a show and they're in it, how do they juggle all that? But
Yeah, no, he
that's
managed it well. And also, I think because it was the first big Broadway show, he was so amenable to everything. And the four of them, the four writers, they were so quick-witted and funny. And yeah, that part was very easy. Yeah, that we
got,
saw. Maybe
right.
in the evening when the actors weren't there, it was
Yeah,
more.
they
I
brought
don't know.
out the bottle and worked on it. Yes. Did you? How long did you stay with the show once it went to New York?
I did it. Jesus, we opened in like April. Preview started, and then I did it till the next June because I left to do Wicked. So
Oh
I
God.
was with it for about 15 months, I guess, in New York.
Have you revisited the show at all, or has it just lives like that in your memory?
I mean, I revisit it because I'm so fond of it, just mentally,
Right.
but I've never done it again.
Never
Or
gone back to doing it again.
yeah. I saw it once up at Sacramento Music Circus because I was in the next show after it. So that it was kind of fun to see them do it in the round.
Well, it's interesting you say that because obviously Musical Theater Guild, which you helped found, 29 hours of rehearsal, script in hand, and I've never forgotten the fact that you always leaned in on this is the book, this is the music, this is what we're here to do. It
Right.
is about spectacle. It isn't about things you can't achieve in that amount of time, but it's about making sure the material gets a good airing out.
Exactly. And I think sometimes the shows are served better because you really listen to the text.
Yes.
That's all you have.
We've had a run of shows here actually that I think have really been benefited by stripping away the required facade of a Broadway show, where
Yeah,
something small might be dwarfed by big scenery or too many costumes or too many moving parts, but suddenly you're leaning in on the characters.
I agree. I agree. There's shows sometimes on Broadway, I'll see them and I go, oh, I wish MTG would do this because I think there's a much better show there than the spectacle.
I think that's the key to it. I think we've found that with other shows as well. And so I'm excited to get in the room with our actors and see what they'll bring to it for this particular material where it's so much about the style of it and making sure everybody's in the same universe.
Right. And one thing that I'm going to share this with you, because to me this was the most important thing when we were discovering the show. When we were in rehearsal, we spent as much time talking about the actors that we were in the script, not the characters we were playing in Drowsy. The Kitty and I were this. We were a married couple. We were famous vaudevillians. Every show we were in, we were always in it in that capacity as that kind of Burns and Allen,
Mhm.
goofball ingenue and the frustrated George Burns type. So that informed everything we did on stage because the audiences would come to see Burns and Allen. And if you did anything different than what the audiences were expecting, you couldn't. It's like the Drowsy Chaperone, whatever the character's name was. They always expected that actress to do this some anthem, and that was all they expected of her. And it made our lives on stage so interesting because we always had this alternate relationship with everybody. And even did it with the ensemble, that each one of them, either they hated Janet or they had done a show with her previously and she was a pain in the neck, or they adored her. I know Joey Swords just played the whole thing. He was the one who was the super who comes
Super,
with
yeah.
and he played the whole show. That he was just in love with Janet. I mean, he just was in love with her, and she didn't even know who he was. And we had to write these lengthy bios about who we were. And Jennifer Smith, who played Kitty, who played my wife in the show, was Kitty. And this was maybe 3 or 4 days into rehearsal, and I had never met Jennifer before. And then we had to go up and read our bios, which Casey was wonderful about giving us plenty of time. And Jennifer and I, without consulting, wrote almost an identical bio, that we were Russian immigrants, we were on the vaudeville circuit. I mean, we literally had the exact same story that we had come up with, and it was just wonderful. And to this day, she's one of my best friends.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And you've reminded me of something else, Musical Theater Guild related, because this show takes place, the show within the show is like 30s, late 20s, 30s.
1920s. It definitely is 1920s. It's almost like Ziegfeld Follies or something.
Right. We've actually done shows from near that era that were so structured around those stars.
Right.
We did Roberta, which was written for Bob Hope.
Right.
But when Bob Hope would leave the show, they would bring in somebody else who had to bring in their style.
Right, exactly.
Comedy. And the same thing happened with Girl Crazy. It was written for Willie Howard. But later, we think Shemp Howard, the fourth Stooge, played it.
And really? Oh, wow.
Structured that way.
Yeah.
And these shows all kind of carry the DNA of these vaudeville actors, vaudeville performers who started them originally, and the Drowsy Chaperone captures that.
Totally, because they were really reviews, and I mean, Drowsy Chaperone has sort of a book to it, but they're really a review. Adolfo, that's what that actor does. He plays that kind of Lothario in every show he's in, probably. And
oh no, that makes perfect sense. All right, well, you've given me a lot to think about. I'm going to ask any other advice for the actors or for me directing, or for Brad.
I mean, anything you'd know just about them being so truthful, with what they're doing, and I don't know. It's such a joy doing it, because the audience is just going to be in heaven, watching it.
I think audiences need to laugh now. The country needs to laugh.
You're not kidding, yeah.
It doesn't seem like it could be a better time. And the only thing
I'm so glad you guys are doing it now.
I only wish you were out here to see it, to hold my hand a little bit, but also
you'll be great.
Take the bow. But Lenny, we appreciate you so much. Your history with the company and your history with the Drowsy Chaperone, and it's a real gift talking to us about the show.
Oh, thank you, Louis. That means a lot. Thanks.
Yeah, and your Musical Theater Guild forever.
Oh, thank you. Well, good luck with the show. I know it's going to be an enormous success with you at the helm. Yeah, congratulations.